Kicking off this list, we have Lad Russo versus a random henchman from Bakano. Now, this one isn't over the top with big magical explosions or excessive amounts of gore like we see in a lot of anime. It's a very believable and realistic fight, but that's what makes it feel more hard-hitting to me. I know just how painful this would be. Lad Russo is one of the most entertaining anime villains, and the pure delight he has in boxing his enemy is pretty entertaining, while also pretty unsettling because he just beats the guy until he's no longer alive. That is a whole other level of savagery right there. It's one thing to take someone out with a weapon. It's quicker, but just using your fists, you gotta really have some passion in what you're doing in order to do something like that. What makes this fight, if you can really even call it a fight, it's more of a full-on one-sided attack, but what makes it extra brutal is that Lad just taunts the guy the whole time, lobbing insults at him just as much as his fists. Number 9, Videl versus Spopovich from Dragon Ball Z. This one really left an impression on me when I was just a little tyke. DBZ is basically just fights from beginning to end, so there were a lot of options here, but I think in terms of that sheer hard-hitting brutality that we're talking about on this list, I think this one takes the cake. Videl had some flashy moves for the first part of this fight and showed that she clearly had some skill, but it didn't take long for the mind-altered Spopovich to unleash this barrage of pure barbaric aggression on her. He just pummeled the poor girl. There weren't a bunch of big, overpowered, powerful key-based moves here, just punches to the gut, kicks. It all looked very painful and more realistic than the fights we often see in DBZ. I had this fight and one of our most one-sided anime fights lists, and for good reason. This one was just a total beatdown. Dio versus Jotaro from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders. Spoilers ahead for this one. So, for starters, this one is just brutal, just for the fact that we lose a major member of the team in Kakuin. Really shows just how serious a threat Dio is, as if we didn't already know that before, but still. And Dio just seemed unbeatable with the world. How do you beat someone who can literally freeze time? Well, tables start to turn when we see that Jotaro actually moves just slightly when he's frozen. Dio manages to consume Jonathan's blood though, now becoming even more powerful, able to freeze time for longer. Jotaro looks like he's going to be crushed under the road roller that Dio drops on him, but he manages to punch his way out of it with Star Platinum, at which point Dio suddenly can't move. Turns out Jotaro can stop time too, and he delivers a brutal kick to his legs, breaking one of them instantly and leaving the vampire mangled on the ground. But the Dio managed to somehow get to his feet, and then his broken leg just sprays blood in Jotaro's eyes, and then he just launches one last kick at him, but Jotaro lands one perfectly placed hit on Dio's shin that sends a ripple effect through his entire body and destroys him for good. Well, not for good, but for good within this season anyway. Ohma versus Raian from Kengan Ashura. There were a number of fights I could have picked from this epically brutal series. Plenty of bone-snapping, bloody hand-to-hand fights here. I feel like this series was just made for a list like this, but let's talk about Ohma finally facing off against Raian. The fight starts off with Ohma landing several hits on his opponent that against anyone else probably would have sent them to the floor instantly, but given Raian's intense bloodline being raised to be the perfect fighting machine, he just basically absorbed Ohma's hits, and the tables abruptly switched when he showed his true level of power, powering up and becoming even more ferocious than before, and threatened to kill Ohma if he didn't unleash his advance. And when Ohma did transform, the fight just became this all-out slugfest, with the two just pummeling each other with their vascular limbs. We think that Ohma is finally out for the count though, until he makes a wicked comeback with his Nico style and finally gets the upper hand on Raian, getting on top of him and just punching some more. He doesn't stop until he finally passes out at the toll his transformation took on his body. Next on the list is Kenshiro versus Raoh from Fist of the North Star. Nothing screams brutality quite like the fights that take place in this post-apocalyptic wasteland. Just the perfect setting for some overly violent matchups, and this one is no exception. This final fight between one of the series' most notorious villains and our main hero is pretty epic, to say the least. Buildings get obliterated in the wake of these two fighters' immense power. Punches and kicks are thrown at lightning speed. The amount amount of blood that sprays out of their wounds is just ridiculous, but like, man, does it add to the drama here. Just visually, it just heightens things and shows how serious these two are coming at each other. It's a pretty back and forth fight with the two just brutalizing each other. It finally looks like the opponents are going to deliver one final blow on each other though, when the fight is suddenly interrupted by the little girl named Lin, and Raoh has a sudden change of heart, and the fight pretty much ends there. Jubei versus Tessai from Ninja Scroll. There's a good amount of older anime on this list, I've just realized, but for good reason. These old school anime were hardcore. Really. Anyway, this fight happens early on in this movie, so though we don't get to see the monstrous Tessai for very long, he certainly left an impression. He'd already ripped a guy's arms off, drank his blood, and then just showed how savage and evil he was. All within the first 5 minutes or so of the movie. We definitely wanted him to be taught a lesson, and our main protagonist, Jubei, certainly delivered. And didn't look like Jubei was winning this fight at first. The giant-sized demon manhandled him early on, picking Jubei up and delivering a series of gut punches that sent blood flying from his mouth. Anime and blood coming out of the mouth really is just a staple of the medium, isn't it? Jubei quickly turns the tables on the demon though, managing to damage his rocky body before slicing off his fingers, and then the boomerang sword weapon type thingy that Tessai launched at Jubei came right back at him, lodging itself right into his head. And just to top off this gruesome bout, Tessai slides down his weapon like Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th Part 4. If you know, you know. But yeah, it's pretty gnarly. Guts versus Bazuso from Berserk. Just like many of the anime on this list, this fight comes from a series with tons of battles I could have discussed that are arguably even more brutal than this one, like the 100 Soldier fight or the Eclipse, but those ones get talked about quite a bit, I think, in terms of just a good one-on-one fight that showcases the true brutality and barbarism of this series. I think this is a good one to discuss. And it's not just brutal because of what actually happens in the fight, which is gory and violent for sure, but it's when Guts refuses to spare Bazuso, who's pleading for mercy, and just takes him out anyway, delivering one last finishing blow to the Grey Knight. That's what really makes this one savage. There's this big size difference between these two. Bazuso is this mountain of a man, and Guts is basically a kid at this point still in his life, but he has Bazuso on the ropes from the very start, coming at him with a barrage of sword swings that push the knight backwards as they hit. Then Guts lands a lethal blow on his opponent, blood starts spraying out, and this is where Bazuso realizes things may not be going quite the way he was expecting, and he starts pleading with the kid to let him live, but Guts just swings his sword down on his head and just smashes it like a watermelon. Isaac Netero versus Meruem from Hunter x Hunter. So this is a fight I've talked about on more than one occasion on this channel, but it's pretty fantastic. And in terms of brutality, I mean, it ends with a giant nuclear-sized explosion. Need I say more? As powerful and skilled a fighter as Netero is, Meruem was just advanced in almost every way. He was a human-destroying force of nature. Netero sent everything he could at the Chimera Ant, but it just wasn't enough. Netero lost his leg, then his arm, then he uses Zero Hand, and not even that technique has any effect on the king. Netero never lost his fighting spirit though. He knew he was going to take out the Ant King one way or another, and finally he pierced his heart, unleashing the massive sized explosion that took his own life and severely wounded Meruem, who would eventually succumb to his injuries. Eren Yeager versus the Warhammer Titan from Attack on Titan. This series is just a smorgasbord of gory battles, but the finish to this one just really sticks in my mind. This one's still fairly recent, so spoiler alerts here. It's not just on here for the ending though. This fight is just absolutely barbaric. You got buildings being destroyed, explosions, just utter chaos. And the Warhammer's ability to create weapons makes it very powerful and an incredibly formidable opponent for Eren's Attack Titan. You even have the Jaw Titan getting in on the action here, and boy does Eren make good use of him. Eren used the Jaw Titan to clamp down on Lara, who was encased in her crystal, controlling the Warhammer Titan from deep beneath the ground, and then proceeded to drink her blood. Quite the finish. And coming in at the top of the list is Hanayama versus Spec from Baki. When Baki and Kazui are suddenly attacked by the escaped convict Spec, Hanayama comes to intervene in what precedes is a fight I can't even fully explain here on YouTube, but wow. Spec throws a lot at Hanayama at first. He sends him flying into a streetlight, bending it in half, then throws a series of rapid punches at him, but they have little effect on Hanayama, who sends Spec flying with a powerful punch to the jaw. And then things just get really crazy from here. I'll just list off some of the insane things that happen here. Spec shoves a bunch of bullets in Hanayama's mouth and then forces his jaws shut, which lights him up pretty good. Half of Hanayama's cheek is now blown off, exposing his teeth. Kneecaps are shot off. Spec jams his finger into Hanayama's ear far enough that he draws blood. I really don't know how much of this is actually going to stay in this video, but it's taking the top spot. I really don't know how it couldn't. Just check the fight out for yourself if you haven't already. And we're kicking off this list with a pretty recent fight in the Christmas Showdown arc from Tokyo Revengers, so spoiler warning. It's everyone versus Taiju. Okay, maybe not everyone, plus Koko and Inui were involved too, but a lot of characters tried to get some licks in on this beast of a fighter. Taiju is scary, man. He seemed like this immovable object. He beat the absolute snot out of Takemichi. Nothing new there really though. He got stabbed by his sister and kept fighting like it was nothing. Hawkeye stood no chance against him. It wasn't until Mikey showed up that the tables finally turned in Tomon's favor. And I'm probably remembering this fight being more brutal than it actually was, just due to how absolutely insane and sadistic Taiju's character is. He just makes everything feel extra heightened. Who's caught up, by the way, with this series? The last episode was nuts. I haven't read the manga, so no spoilers in the comments, please. Number 9, Frieza versus Krillin from Dragon Ball Z. Versus. Heavy quotations there. Yeah, not even Monkey D. Luffy could stretch far enough to call this a fight, but it's definitely brutal. To give Krillin some credit though, he did show a tremendous level of bravery and did manage to hurl some Destructo Discs Frieza's way, one of which actually cut off his tail. Anyway, Frieza beats Krillin up a couple different times, and both attacks are unnecessarily cruel. It's almost like Frieza was just enraged at the very idea that this little human was even attempting to take him on. I'm sure the fact that Krillin cut off his tail didn't help either though, and he taunted him, which also pissed him off, so still, this was petty. In Frieza's second form, he chased after Krillin before impaling him with his horn. This is already a gorier image than the your typical exchange of rapid punches and kicks and laser blasts that we often see in DBZ, but then Frieza takes it one step further, showing just how cruel and sadistic he can be when he starts torturing Krillin by bouncing him up and down on his horn repeatedly, blood just spurting out of the wound, and it just goes on and on. It's awful. Then he blows up Krillin later on, but we've talked about that plenty of times. And this one's kind of worse in my opinion. Aki here versus Iok Kujan from Mobile Suit Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans. Spoiler warning for this one. So, Gundam doesn't typically come to mind when we think of brutal anime fights, because it's a mecha anime series. Not that mecha anime can't be dark and violent, there's just something more violent and visceral about punches and kicks or, swords clashing. Anyway, that's the end of this fight that really earns it the spot on this list though. Watching a dude get crushed to death inside his own mobile suit, that's pretty brutal. Kujan's body starts contorting as he has less and less space to move, just knowing there's no way he's gonna make it out of this alive, just screaming in agony before he's finally crushed to death. This would just be the worst, especially if you're claustrophobic. Eesh. I feel like you don't even really need to be claustrophobic to have a visceral reaction to this though. It's like, even if you don't have a fear of heights, you'd still be crapping your pants if you were skydiving and your parachute didn't open up. Eren versus the female Titan, round 1 from Attack on Titan. So not only was the lead up to this fight incredibly brutal, with Levi's squad being downright wasted by the female Titan, but the scuffle between her and the enraged Eren was down and dirty too. Eren transformed into the Attack Titan before going up against the mysterious female Titan head on. This one is pretty much just a thunderous boxing match, lots of powerful punches, but there's some wrestling in there too. It's the last bit that really sticks out though. The attack titan gets his lower jaw knocked right off before the female titan punches right through a tree, taking the top of the attack titan's head with it. You just see the head flying through the air in slow motion before the female titan finally chomps down on its nape, ripping Eren right out of it. We also get this creepy shot where her jaw opens up and she's looking dead on at the camera. I almost want to look away. Very nightmarish. Kiryu versus Nikaido from Kangen Ashura. If you want brutal fights, Kangen Ashura it's like your one-stop shop. You can pretty much put any fight on here from this series. This one makes me cringe though. Ren goes on the offensive at first, showing himself to be a pretty speedy opponent, but almost immediately Kiryu gets the upper hand, disabling Ren's shoulder with a technique called Rakshasa's palm. The muscles are all twisted up and he can't raise it. It's so gnarly looking, and I just imagine how painful and messed up that would feel to have all the muscle in your shoulder all contorted and knotted up. So now Ren is fighting with one arm, and he gets some solid hits in, but Kiryu finishes it off again using the same technique, this time on Ren's chest, twisting up his heart. And this is just gross. And then, so Ren drops to his knees in defeat, but he doesn't slump all the way down to the ground because he can't. His insides are so contorted and twisted that they're holding his body up. It's nasty. Denji versus Katana Man from Chainsaw Man, or I guess you could say Chainsaw Man versus Katana Man. Anyway, pretty much every fight in this series is brutal, but I figured I'd put this one on the list, the one we've actually seen play out in the anime. This fight starts off with a bang, with the two flying out the window of a skyscraper, then they're both hurling each other across buildings, they end up on top of a moving train, then they smash into the train and people are panicking, sparks are flying, limbs get lobbed off. You gotta have that, right? It's Chainsaw Man after all. And just when it seems Katana Man has beaten our hero, they clash one last time and Chainsaw Man cuts the villain right down the middle and he just splits in two perfect halves, spewing just so much blood all over the train. In fact, this fight is mostly on here for the ending alone. It's pretty horrific. One of those, how is there that much blood in a human body kind of moments. Violence Jack versus Harlem Bomber from the 1986 OVA Violence Jack Harlem Bomber. Violence Jack is an absolute classic when it comes to overly gratuitous and violent manga and anime. I'm not too familiar with it myself. I've heard the name, but I only really watched some of it while putting this list together. But, oh boy, this series takes place in a post-apocalyptic setting, which is, as we've seen time and time again, the perfect setting for some seriously messed up stuff to take place, and features a mysterious character named Violence Jack, a beastly 7-foot-tall man, or is he a man, with sharp fangs who roams the wasteland taking out bandits and gang lords. In this OVA, the titular Violence Jack goes up against a villain named the Harem Bomber, or Harlem Bomber, depending on the translation. The two exchange blows, with Jack even having his fingers cut off while he's holding on for dear life off the side of a building. Then something totally insane happens. Two characters named Mary and Kenichi are flying overhead in a helicopter. Mary throws a rope down to save Violent Jack's life as he's plummeting to the ground. He grabs the rope, pulls himself to safety, and uses his immense strength to pull the helicopter down, hurling it into Harem Bomber before finishing him off. This comes at the cost of Kenichi's life, who flies out of the chopper, slamming his noggin right into the concrete. Just an innocent guy just taken out in the crossfire. Aemon, the Apocalypse of Devilman. Yes, I'm putting the entire 2000 OVA on here because, again, my god, this movie is just a non-stop barrage of barbaric violence. Nobody is safe in this anime. I guess I'll talk mostly about the fight between Akira and a gang of demons who he just rips apart mercilessly. One of the highlights of this fight is a female-looking demon who he just... How do I describe this? I'll just show it. He does this. It just rips it right off. You know what I'm getting at. Just watch it. Just watch this OVA. It's about as brutal as it gets. You have demons punching holes through each other. There's constant heavy metal music playing in the background. It's just such an angry, abrasive affair. It's like you're just being whacked with a baseball bat for 45 minutes. Alright, coming in at number 2, Yujiro vs. Ryu from Baki. I've definitely talked about this one before, I think on a one-sided anime fights list, but it's the one-sided fights that are often also the most brutal. Anyway, how could I not mention this one at some point on a brutal fights list? This is just pure anime insanity at its finest. After proclaiming that breaking boards or tiles or any other object that can't hit back is pointless, the seasoned martial artist Ryu steps to Yujiro, telling him it's a practice that allows martial artists to grow and progress without hurting anyone. Then, Yujiro Hanma tells him he'll show him just how useless all those years of quote-unquote progress were before jamming his hand right into the old man's face, slamming him into the ground with one arm, ripping his face clean off, and then tossing it into the dumbfounded crowd. Now, let's face it, this one is so short it barely even qualifies as a fight, but man does it leave an impression. And coming in at first place is Masaki vs. Gazenga from Kengan Ashura. Yeah, I had to put another Kengan Ashura fight on the list. Masaki is just an absolute nutcase. He loves causing pain and loves taking it just as much, which makes him an incredibly tough opponent to take on. Masaki takes Gazenga to the ground and starts unleashing a barrage of blows so intense there's just these clouds of blood in the air. But Masaki is just laughing the whole time as he's getting hit. Then Gazenga punches one of Masaki's eyes out before jamming his finger into the crying man's ear. But this just makes Masaki stronger because, as stated before, he revels in pain, and so then he just gouges out both of Gazenga's eyes. Luckily, Gazenga's already blind. Now, this next part is where the tables turn in Gazenga's favor for good. He grabs hold of Masaki's special parts and squeezes, causing Masaki to writhe in agony, and then he just snaps the freak up before finally finishing him off. To top off this grisly display, Masaki just smiles and thinks to himself how fun the fight was before he finally falls down dead. I didn't put this fight in part 1 of this list because I just didn't know how to talk about it without getting the video flagged, but you know, come part 2, I couldn't help it. I had to talk about it, so there you go. I'm leaving some stuff out. You should just go and watch that fight and get the full scope.
Number 10, Cell vs. Gohan. When it comes to legendary anime fights, it's hard to think of a series that has even half as many iconic ones as Dragon Ball Z. A series that was basically just the coolest fights in anime almost exclusively. But if we're going for sheer cool factor and brutality, nothing tops Cell vs. Gohan. This thing sprawled 6 episodes, which means you could sit down and watch this as a full-length theater movie, you know, 2 hours to just watch Cell and Gohan go at it. I remember coming home from school, catching a lot of this when I was young, and it felt like I was watching like these actual like titans or like gods clash. These guys way larger than life, the coolest Dragon Ball bad guy, the prodigal son. The fight has basically everything that's cool about Dragon Ball in it. You got epic transformations, a father-son Kamehameha, but most importantly, we get to see Gohan lay the smackdown on Cell. One of the coolest fights in Dragon Ball, and maybe one of the coolest fights in anime, full stop. Number 9, Zoro vs. Mr. 1. A ton of amazing One Piece fights to choose, so narrowing them down was real hard. There's a part 4, I can guarantee you we do another One Piece fight on here for sure, but for this one I'm going with Zoro's duel against Mr. 1 during the Arabasta arc. Daz Bones is the perfect rival for Zoro. The Dice Fruit gives him the ability to turn any part of his body into steel, giving him a wide variety of slashing attacks to keep up with the Straw Hat Swordsman's barrage. Now, like a lot of Zoro's early fights, we see Zoro get beaten at first. You know, he's torn open, wounded, soaking sweaty, and tired. Zoro's only motivation in this fight isn't winning, but it's to push himself past his limit and to cut through steel, reminding himself of his training when he was young, when he was told that a sword can't cut steel. It seems like Zoro has bitten off more than he can handle. He tried a one-sword technique and is eventually able to harness his willpower into the sword. He slashes right through Mr. 1 in an epic moment. It's a character-defining moment for Zoro, and it's one of the cooler fights in the series, and it's number 9 on the list today. Number 8, Cosmo vs. Okoye. Pretty much this whole list could just be Kengan Ashura fights and you probably wouldn't even notice a difference. It's an anime that just is brutal fights, like that's the whole thing about it. There have been a few of them on these lists so far, and today is going to be no different when we shout out Cosmo vs. Okoye. You know, when a fight is the Strangler versus the Executioner, it's not going to be pretty, and wow, it is not pretty. Even by this series' standards, this one stands out. Cosmo comes out swinging, but immediately takes some damage damage. And then it gets a lot worse when Okoye starts taking a bite out of Cosmo's flesh, chewing it in front of him to get him angry, and then getting on top and slowly breaking his ribs one by one with his thumb. It's actually hard to watch. Like, you forget that it's a cartoon. The crowd looks in stunned silence. The referee's wondering if maybe he should stop this. You feel like you're watching a snuff anime. The fight seems like it's a curb stomp until a little motivation and a few broken ribs inspire Cosmo to get a second wind. He realizes he doesn't like fighting, he likes winning, and he flips the circumstances and gives Okoye Seishu a brutal comeuppance, somehow but thankfully ending up with a win. Number 7. Levi versus the Beast Titan. Now say whatever you want about Attack on Titan, I won't stop you. It's got some of the best fight scenes in anime around. We've mentioned a bunch of them in the other 2 parts of this video, and I don't want to break tradition. This one we're going to be talking about is Levi fighting against the Beast Titan. Now a lot of the fights on this list have been some epic duels against the heroes and villains, you know, equally matched, clashing for episodes, fate of the world and all that. This isn't one of those. Levi absolutely clears the Beast Titan and he makes a fool out of it. It's honestly not even a fight, it's more of an execution. Before the fight even, there's a scene where Zeke gets told that he needs to be on the lookout for one soldier in particular, with the others telling him, yeah, Captain Levi, he's kind of like a piece of work. How little he knows until he sees Levi coming out, tearing him apart like he's trying to make pulled Titan sandwiches. Just an unbelievable moment, just one of the coolest animated scenes in the entire series. Number 6. Naruto versus Sasuke. I feel like if you grew up in a certain time period, around the same age I am, this one meant the world to you. Naruto and Sasuke have had one of the most epic and infamous anime rivalries out there pretty much since day one when they accidentally kissed. Who hasn't done that with their homies? Come on. The fight at the end of Shippuden culminates on everything the show was building on. We get to see Naruto and Sasuke at the absolute top of their game, trading blows, going hard and pushing themselves to their absolute limit. We see the two of them throw literally every ability and technique they have at one another until by the end of it, the two of them are just reduced to nothing. They're drained and they're fighting like they were when they're in school again. Just like aimless flailing, no technique, no strategy or anything. The emotions are so high, and above it all, Naruto still forgives Sasuke and is still there for him. Brutal fight, but even more brutal on the emotions. Number 5. Tenga Toppa Gurren Lagann versus the Anti-Spiral. Gurren Lagann is a totally ridiculous series. It's kind of what it's all about. It's always been one of my favorites just for its sheer ridiculousness and awesome approach to mech stuff. I kind of call it like the opposite Evangelion, since it's all about how awesome it is to get inside a giant robot and how it has no emotional effects and it won't ruin your life. There's a ton of great fights and beatdowns in this series, but if there's a best fight to pick from Gurren Lagann, it has to be the last one just for the scale and size of it all. There's some wild transformations in Gurren Lagann. It seems like they're always trying to outdo themselves, and then they get themselves into a corner when you get the full Tenga Toppa Gurren Lagann mode dueling the Anti-Spiral. It's apex ridiculousness. The two mechs are literally the size of universes. They're hurling galaxies and parts of the cosmos at each other. It's like gods fighting. All the while the music's swelling and the emotion of everything coming to this huge conclusion. This one isn't as violent or outright brutal as some of the other ones on this list, but the magnitude of this one makes it shine. They're robots throwing planets at each other. That's hilarious, and it's way too good. One of the best endings to one of the best animes out there, and just never a bad time for a rewatch. If you were looking for a sign to rewatch Gurren Lagann, this was it. Number 4. Kaneda versus Tetsuo. It might seem a bit unfair to refer to this one as a fight, since compared to a few of the other ones in this list, there's honestly not that many physical blows being traded, but in terms of stakes, emotions, and yeah, brutality, the final showdown between Kaneda and Tetsuo in the legendary Akira is one of the best fight scenes there is. You know, confronted with his friend who's been driven absolutely insane off of his godlike abilities. I probably would too, so some sympathy there, Tetsuo. Happens to the best of us. Kaneda throws himself head first, ready to throw down. He's not some superpowered warrior or legendary Spec Ops soldier or anything. He's just a guy with a motorbike, and he's got a laser gat, and he's gonna do his level best to take down his buddy, who is essentially a god. It's one of those fights too where the emotions are high enough and you don't really want to see see either of them actually take each other out. You kind of just hope everything can all be okay. They can hug and just go back to riding motorcycles around town. Of course, it comes to a head when Tetsuo's powers become too much for him to control, and he ends up mutating into one of the most disgusting things ever put to animation. The final scene is unbelievable, and every time I've seen it, it still seems like the first time. Somehow I get the same horrified that I always do. It makes you realize just how little chance Kaneda even stood against an actual fight, making it all the more inspiring that he even did. One of my favorite movies ever, not even anime, just one of my favorite movies. If somehow you've never seen Akira, fix that immediately. Number 3, Giorno Giovanna vs. Cioccolata. JoJo's bizarre adventure is known for its ridiculous sense of humor, flashy style, incredibly cool characters, and brutal beatdowns. It is honestly pretty surprising how silly and how violent JoJo is in equal measures. This is a series where the usual way you win a fight is by punching a guy 1,000 times. Now there's a ton of amazing options, but Giorno Giovanna vs. Cioccolata is the one that takes the cake for me for just how insane it caps off. The gang is making their way to Rome to meet their mystery contact who wants to help them take down Diavolo when they're intercepted by the latest goons of the week, namely Cioccolata and Secco. Cioccolata's stand Green Day infects enemies with a mold that causes them to rot apart and is just disgusting and seems unbeatable. It seems like the most deadly enemy the gang has faced to that point. If you're just around them and moving your body, you get infected by it. Now you get to see some epic assists from Mista, some of the nuttiest use of the boy's powers, like Giorno turning a bullet into a stag beetle so that it'll eat Cioccolata's brain. I wish I had the brain to come up with stuff like that. And then finishing off with one of the best moments in all of JoJo, Giorno tells Cioccolata he's too pathetic to spare and keep alive, and then he unleashes an unimaginable barrage of punches. In the manga, it was a full 7 pages, just 7 pages straight of him punching a guy. In the anime, it's like 2 minutes straight of him punching, finishing off with a re, just like his father. Truly a golden experience. Number 2, Guts vs. 100 Soldiers. Guts is the coolest anime protagonist ever. I'm gonna rip the band-aid off right there. Sorry Luffy and Goku fans, had to get that out of the way. I got a lot of love for those two, but Guts is the best. Pretty much every single fight Guts has ever got himself into could qualify as a most brutal fight, but it's the one against the 100 soldiers I wanted to shout out, as I think it's a defining moment showing you exactly who Guts is. We know the guy's strong, look at his sword, and we know he's a good sword fighter, but this fight is when you realize Guts is above and beyond what any human being is capable of. He just does not give up under any circumstances. But what makes it shine is while he's doing all this, how introspective he is. The man is literally chopping his way through a battalion, and instead of fearing for his life or worrying about anything, all he's thinking is stuff like, what does it mean to fight in a war? Does it make a difference if I take one man's life or 100? It's unbelievably cool. You watch the Black Swordsman take all these guys down like they're ants, all the while like Guts is monologuing and waxing poetical about, if he has a purpose in this world. And when it's all done, Casca finds Guts, weary, fatigued from the slaughter, resting at a tree, cuddling his sword like a babe. Oh, Berserk is the best, man. And number 1, Asuka versus the mass production Evangelions. As soon as I opened the notepad, this was the number 1 fight. I didn't even need to think twice about it. I'm confident this is one of the best anime fight scenes of all time. The end of Evangelion is an extremely emotionally draining movie, and this fight is no exception. Now all the fights on this list have been pretty cool, but this one is like actual art. I think they should have like a little projector playing a constant loop of this fight at the Louvre, and everyone can come in and just appreciate a couple minutes of cool anime. Everything is coming to a horrific end in the world of Evangelion. The world is literally falling apart. A ton of the main characters are all dying violently. Soft boy hero Shinji has completely given up, and Asuka, who's endured mental hell, is broken, sitting alone in her Eva while Nerve headquarters gets sacked, and then the mass production Evas fly in, 13 cloned Evas here to kickstart instrumentality. You've got all these emotional highs and lows in a fight against a giant clone of an angel fighting against mass-produced angel robots. Oh, it's beautiful. When Asuka's first cowering, afraid to die, and then overcome with this feeling of hope that her mother's soul and love will watch over her and save her, and then just the most horrific, brutal beatdown as she gets literally torn apart by the mass production Evas, choreographed beautifully, set to a box song. I can't remember which one right now, but it's a classical violin piece. It's beautiful. The animation to this day, some of the most stunning animations I've seen. I actually did write it down. It's box suite number 3 accompanying it. I get chills every time. God, I love Evangelion.
And we're kicking off this list with Luffy versus Usopp from One Piece. Now, I'm putting this one at number 10 because it's not actually as one-sided as you'd probably think, given that it's a fight between Monkey D. Luffy and Usopp, but it is one of the best one-sided fights I can think of off the top of my head, so I know I had to put it on here somewhere. This fight is just packed with emotion. It's such an intense fight, both the actual physical fight and the argument that leads up to it, which is just so well written and real feeling that it's almost like uncomfortable to watch. Now, as I said, the fight itself is a lot less one-sided than you'd think it would be. I mean, Luffy has taken on opponents leagues more powerful than Usopp, who doesn't even have any powers, and on top of that, isn't really much of a fighter anyway. But his cleverness proved to be more of a challenge than Luffy was expecting, and he threw a lot his captain's way, but this fight would have ended way sooner if Luffy actually wanted to hurt him. I mean, he was holding back, and once he decided to take the fight seriously, it was over pretty fast. We all knew Luffy was going to come out on the top here. Next up is Videl versus Spopovich from Dragon Ball Z. I remember watching this episode as a kid and being kinda shocked about just how brutal it was. There are some violent fights in Dragon Ball Z, but they're a lot flashier and certainly aren't as realistic, even the more one-sided ones, but this fight was just utterly brutal, probably because of how grounded and realistic it felt. It makes it seem even more violent. There aren't many key-based attacks, just lots of strong punches, kicks, and just ground and pound. It's also this big muscly brute beating down a noticeably smaller woman, which also makes it harder to watch. Videl was doing actually pretty well at first, which I totally forgot about while rewatching it, because all I remembered about this fight was her getting brutally beaten down for what felt like the entirety of the episode, and she just kept getting up. Even Goku was like, okay, she should really throw in the towel now. There was just no coming back from this. Spopovich even tossed her into the air and then broke her on his knee, kind of a bane on her. Definitely a fight that stuck with me. Ken Kaneki versus Jason from Tokyo Ghoul. Not only was this beatdown a totally clear-cut victory for Kaneki, but it was just so damn cathartic too, wasn't it? After experiencing grueling, excruciating torture, both physically and mentally, at the hands of the depraved Jason, Kaneki managed to break free of his restraints and unleashed a barrage of fury on his torturer. This is where we saw him become the Kaneki we all think of him as today. His hair having turned white from the torment he'd experienced and having finally embraced his ghoul side. He was an all-new being now. And Jason didn't stand a chance against his newfound power. Ken just dodged almost every attack he threw at him, and even when Jason managed to land a blow, Kaneki just took it with an eerie smile before finally slamming Jason into the ground with his Kagane, leaving him in a giant crater. Number 7, Mikey versus Osanai from Tokyo Revengers. Okay, so this anime is full of beatdowns, but in terms of a totally clear-cut, easy, one-sided win, I gotta give it to this one. Especially because this is a fight between two gang leaders. It's not like Mikey was beating up on some lackey or something. He wasn't really even beating up on this guy, to be fair. It was just one swift kick to the head, and that was it. It was over before it even started. Things were looking dire for the members of Toman, who were surrounded by Mobius, and Osanai, the gang's leader, had just brutally beaten Pa, who is no slouch himself, so it really looked like Toman was about to take a serious beating. But to everyone's shock, minus Draken, of course, Mikey just put their leader down with a single kick to the cranium. Coming in at number 6 is Kishibe versus Power and Denji from Chainsaw Man. Calling this a fight is really a stretch. It's more of a series of executions. In order to hone Power and Denji's skills, Makima introduced them to one of the best devil hunters on the force, the grizzled veteran Kishibe. Kishibe proceeded to test the two by having the two try their best to kill him, which led to Denji and Power being killed repeatedly for hours. If they weren't a hybrid and a fiend respectively, they'd just be gone. They'd be dead now. We would not have a show. Even when they took the time to plan a booby trap in an attempt to take out Kishibe by surprise, they totally failed, with their new teacher dodging Power's blood spear with just godlike reflexes, not even having seen it coming before it flew through the door, no less, and then proceeded to knock Denji out like he was nothing after he tried attacking him from behind. It was pretty clear that these two were no match for Kishibei's fighting skills when not in their devil forms anyway. Alright, Trunks versus Frieza from Dragon Ball Z. Yeah, I couldn't help it. I had to put another DBZ fight on the list. Is this even a fight? I think it's just straight up murder. Anyway, it's one of the most iconic one-sided fights in anime probably, and introduced us to an absolute fan favorite character in Trunks, so I had to put it on the list. Future Trunks is still regarded as awesome, even though we barely, see him anymore, and I think his dicing up of Frieza is part of what made him stick in people's heads. Frieza was this overpowered, seemingly unbeatable villain who Goku fought for episode after episode that we watched week after week, wondering if it would ever end and if Goku was even going to win at some points. So when this mysterious Saiyan appeared out of nowhere and sliced up cybernetically enhanced version of the villain with a sword before doing these, rad hand motions and then blasting him into smithereens, it was like, what? Like, who the hell is this kid? I want to be him. Then you went on to Ice King Cold too. Good times. Roy Mustang versus Envy from Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Yeah, this is a pretty famous one. This is just all-out annihilation at the hands of Mustang, who is hell-bent on vengeance after finding out the homunculus was responsible for Mei Yuji's death. You just see this look of pure terror in Envy's eyes when Mustang is standing over them, like they're looking into the eyes of death itself. Roy just unleashes this massacre on Envy, with explosion after explosion, completely destroying their body. He doesn't even let Envy get any words out. He could not possibly care less about what they have to say. I almost felt bad for Envy at one point. Those screams are just harsh. I also love how Mustang's snaps get increasingly more aggressive as it goes on before he releases one final snap that he almost has to power up for a second before unleashing. It's just pure unfiltered anger. Yujiro Hanma versus Ryu from Baki the Grappler. This was one of the most creatively brutal wins that I've ever seen. Ryu goes to attack Yujiro, and with his fingers just mere inches from his opponent's face, he suddenly stops as a look of horror crosses his face, and Yujiro's fingers enter his face. Then Yujiro just throws him to the ground face first like a rag doll. At first I couldn't quite tell what happened because Yujiro just kind of seemed to slam his head into the ground, and I was like, are his fingers actually in his cheek? Like, no way. That's crazy. But then it was confirmed when he threw Ryu's face into the shocked and horrified crowd. Ryu actually tried to get up and continue fighting after this, but was taken out immediately with a kick to his now skinless face. This is a perfect example of taking a villain and putting their power on terrifying display. Quick and about as brutal and one-sided as it gets. Killua versus Jonas from Hunter x Hunter comes in at second place. This is about as swift and definitive as it gets. Again, I've said this so many times on this list, but this one is so one-sided that I don't even think it qualifies as a fight. During the entrance exams, our heroes reach a phase where they have to fight a series of prisoners one-on-one. Killua goes up against a notorious serial killer and swiftly tears his heart out, to Jonas's complete horror. We had heard of Killua's assassination abilities, but actually seeing how cold and ruthless he could be came as quite the shock. His opponent didn't even have a chance to swing on him. He literally just reached his hand out before realizing that the kid had already killed him. Killua certainly doesn't look like a ruthless assassin who could take out someone 5 times his size, but what can I say, the kid's got heart. And taking first place is pretty much every fight that Saitama takes part in from One Punch Man. Nothing screams one-sided like being knocked out with a single punch, and in Saitama's case, even totally obliterated sometimes. A one-punch knockout is embarrassing for the one who takes the punch. Sure, it could just be a fluke hitting the right spot at just the right angle, but it spells a completely clear victory for the person that threw it. For Saitama, his punches aren't just flukes, he takes out his opponents with one hit just about every time. It's a struggle for him to find anyone or anything that can withstand more. Once you start having to battle monsters from outer space just to have a more interesting fight, you know your workouts have paid off. As we've seen on this list, there are a lot of one-sided fights in the world of anime, and even plenty one-hit finishers, but in terms of sheer consistency, Saitama may hold the record, especially for a main character, and he doesn't even need any fancy moves to do it, just a simple tried and true knuckle sandwich to get the job done. And we're gonna kick this list off with Guts versus 100 Men from Berserk. Guts is just one of those guys you just look at and you know you'd never want to mess with. He's just got that face of someone who's been through hell, and he has. There's nothing he's better at than slicing people in half who get in his way. What's cool about this fight is that Guts was severely outnumbered, but made the enemy soldiers seem like they were the ones who were outnumbered. Kasuga actually helped out in the fight too, but she wasn't in it for as long. There's this part where she slices this guy's wrist though, and the blood starts spraying everywhere. Man, that was just like, looked really gnarly. Anyway, so when Guts and Kasuga were suddenly ambushed in the forest by sword-wielding soldiers, Guts and Kasuga started fighting them off, but eventually Kasuga escaped to come back with reinforcements. As it turned out though, the reinforcements weren't really needed, as they had all been butchered by the time she got back. So Guts had sustained some minor injuries here. He had a couple arrows in him and he was visibly tired, but nowhere near close to death, which, considering how many enemies he just faced off against, it was pretty one-sided to me. This is just a super bloody and brutal fight. Berserk is just awesome. Next up on the list is Mirio versus Class 1A from My Hero Academia. It's a good thing this was, just a friendly bout and not an actual full-on fight, because Mirio clearly would have severely injured the young first-year students, or worse, if he was fighting more seriously. In preparation for the hero work studies, Class 1A met 3 of the top students from 3rd year, and in order to display the usefulness of the hero work study, Mirio faced off against the young students and swept the floor with all of them. Nobody could land an attack on him. Certainly helped that Mirio's quirk was permeation, allowing solid objects to move right through him. The only students missing were Shoto and Bakugo, 2 of Class 1A's best, to be fair, but seeing as the 18 other students couldn't even scratch the hero, it was unlikely even they would have made much of a difference in the fight. It's no surprise that Mirio was the original student who All Might was considering as the next successor for One for All. The Straw Hats versus the Frankie family from One Piece. I really hated the Frankie family at first. They just caused so much drama within the crew. And the fact that Oda somehow turned it around and made me like them, really never saw that coming. But that just speaks to how solid the writing is in this series. Anyway, I digress. Back when the Frankie family was the absolute worst and beat the crap out of Usopp and stole the money they were going to use to repair the Mary, I wanted nothing more than to see Luffy and his crew teach them a lesson, and teach them a lesson they did. The anime rendition of this is good, but there is this absolutely epic panel in the manga where you see Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Chopper all walking towards the Frankie house side by side. It just looks so bad. It looks like a shot from Quentin Tarantino movie or a Western or something. You just know they're gonna tear the place down. Stared at that panel for like a while when I first saw it. It's that classic heroes outnumbered by the baddies moment, except such an injustice has been done that you don't want to see them struggle at all. You just want to see them beat the bad guys down, and that's exactly what happens. Genkai versus Suzuka from Yu Yu Hakusho. Losing to a short old lady in a fight would probably be pretty embarrassing, but if it were Genkai I was facing off against, I'd be glad if I managed to just stay in the fight without getting knocked out instantly. In the Dark Tournament, Genkai went up against the self-proclaimed beautiful Suzuka, and as it turned out, this guy would look even more like a clown than his appearance initially led on. Genkai just manhandles this guy, actually going as far as to just jump on his back repeatedly at one point. Can't say I've ever seen that before. She just hurls him around like a rag doll, even sending him flying into the air, only to land on her fist which cracks his spine in half. And as stated before, Genkai wasn't even using her spiritual energy. I don't think I stated that before, actually. Genkai wasn't even using her spiritual energy here, just pure brute force. I'd say that Suzuka also stated he wouldn't use any of his spiritual energy either, but he didn't really get a chance to hit her with any attacks at all, so he couldn't have even used it if he wanted to. Jogo versus Gojo from Jujutsu Kaisen. This is going to be hard not to mix these names up constantly. This fight really exemplified why Gojo is known as the most powerful Jujutsu sorcerer in this series. Jogo was a special grade curse spirit, and Gojo made him look like a grade 4 curse. Not only did Gojo decimate this curse, but he used him in order to give Itadori a live in-person lesson on Jujutsu sorcery, warping to Jujutsu tech just to grab Yuji and bring him back to the battle in an instant so he could teach him about domain expansions. So that is to say, he didn't view Jogo as a threat whatsoever and had full confidence in his ability to exercise it without a hitch. That's some serious level of confidence in one's own abilities right there, and as you can probably expect, Gojo backed up his attitude with his actual abilities, overcoming Jogo's domain expansion with his own infinite void, completely overwhelming the special grade curse. Then he just rips his head off. Zoro versus Mihawk. Yeah, I definitely had to talk about this one for part 2 of this list. This fight is one of the most famously one-sided bouts in probably all of anime. You have the pirate hunter Zoro, who's just now starting out his new career as a pirate, versus one of the warlords of the sea, Mihawk, aka the strongest swordsman in the world. I don't know what Zoro really expected was going to happen here. Well, Mihawk, of course, totally outclasses our 3-sword-wielding hero here with nothing but his dagger, no less. But even though it was a definitive loss for Zoro, he still managed to come out of it looking really cool. Even Mihawk gave him props. I fell in love with this character at this point and really wanted to see him rise up and succeed in his goal, becoming the world's greatest swordsman one day. This scene was incredibly important in the growth of Zoro's character, and in a way, this is what really kicks off his story. Like, he wanted to be the greatest swordsman even before this, but now he had a very clear hurdle to overcome. Madara versus the allied shinobi forces from Naruto. This was just a display of pure power on a whole other level. We've seen some of Shonen's most famous villains take on powerful heroes and beat them down easily, or even take on multiple heroes at once and win, but this was just crazy. Madara took out countless shinobi, just cutting through the battlefield like he was ripping out weeds from his front yard on the way to the bus stop or something. And not only did he take out swaths of unnamed soldiers, he also fought all 5 Kage and won. He displayed borderline god levels of power here, using his Rinnegan and Sharingan to swat away allied shinobi forces like flies. Madara had always been talked and whispered about throughout the series. He had this dark presence, but seeing him go full on in action was pretty cool to see. Next on the list is Yuno versus Salim from Black Clover. There's nothing sweeter than seeing someone who's so self-important and smug get a dose of reality smeared right in their face. Salim was just boasting about how much of an honor it was for Yuno just to be facing him, and he was barely even worthy of it. Blah, blah, blah. With just one spell though, the calm and collected Yuno overwhelmed the arrogant wizard without even taking any damage at all. To say this was satisfying is a bit of an understatement. I love moments like this in anime, or any medium for that matter. Real life, that's the best. Salim thought that because he was a rich nobleman, he was just born better than the poor Yuno who was born with nothing, but that just wasn't the case. Alright, this is a funny one. Kenpachi versus Giriko from Bleach. This fight, and I'm using that word very loosely here, is about as cut and dry as it gets. And no surprise here, but Kenpachi wins. Yuko sent everyone to separate rooms, and Execution's Giriko was paired off with the Gote 13 Squad 11 Captain Kenpachi. Unfortunately for him. You think someone proclaiming themselves as this master of time would be, able to last more than a minute with their opponent, but that was not the case here. He was insulted that Kenpachi had wanted to switch opponents with Byakuya because his fighter looked stronger, so he hulked out, turning green and his muscles growing to enormous size. This would be enough to send most people running for the hills, but before Giriko could even throw a punch, he was suddenly sliced in half in such a swift motion that we as the audience don't even see it happen. It's like he was a whole person and then he was just sliced down the middle in an instant. They didn't even bother like animating it. And coming in at the top of the list is Gon versus Pito from Hunter x Hunter. Gon was devastated when Kite was taken away, but he had hope that he'd be able to find his friend alive. But when Gon discovered that Kite had died at Pito's hands, he powered up, taking on an adult form and used the full extent of his Nen abilities, sacrificing everything just to avenge his friend. And when I say he takes on an adult form, I mean he takes on the form of like a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure character or something big and veiny and strong looking. And Neferpito didn't stand a chance. This was just like many other fights on this list, more, you know, of a full-on execution delivered with fists than a fight. Pito made a few attempts to land some hits on Gon at first, but he just dodged them like they were coming at him in slow motion. And from then on, Pito didn't even have a chance to throw a punch or a kick or anything, even defend themselves for that matter. Gon showed a terrifying level of raw strength here, and it's just an unforgettable moment. Also, kinda sad. And we are kicking this list off with Moomin Rider versus Deep Sea King from One Punch Man. The Sea King really paid for this beatdown pretty soon after when he went up against Saitama, but for a little while he thought the people of the land were going to be no stronger than this C-class hero, and oh how badly humanity would have been screwed if that really was the case. Moomin Rider got trounced so badly here that it's comical, while also being a pretty touching moment. I feel bad for the bicycle riding hero. He just kept getting up to fight for justice, but the way he was just totally shut down after everyone was cheering him on, the kid's like, get up! It was just hard for me not to laugh at the same time. Rider went to throw a punch at the nautical nuisance, who just grabbed a small human's fist with his giant fishy hand before lifting him up and slamming him into the ground like a baby slamming a toy into the floor repeatedly. And then the King of the Sea sent Moomin Rider flying into the air. Moomin Rider, being the brave hero he is, like I said, he got up to fight again, but was once again sent flying. You can't win them all, Moomin Rider, or in your case, any at all. Sukuna versus the Cursed Womb from Jujutsu Kaisen. It was clear right from the start that Sukuna was not taking his opponent seriously as he casually strolled towards the Cursed Womb, his hands in his pockets, a bored expression on his face. The Cursed Womb, on the other hand, was sweating profusely. Sukuna's confidence was warranted. He is the king of curses after all, and he effortlessly dispatched the Cursed Womb with a flick of his finger. The Cursed Womb, realizing his fate was sealed, let out a painful wail before exploding into a cloud of black smoke. Sukuna barely even broke a sweat. The Cursed Womb's defeat was so swift and decisive that it really seemed like a joke, but it was really there just to show the vast difference in our main hero Yuji's power and Sukuna's, as Yuji was no match for the Cursed Womb until he gave his body over to Sukuna to take care of the job. Gohan versus Bojack from Dragon Ball Z Bojack Unbound. We haven't talked much about the Dragon Ball movies outside of superhero on the channel yet, so here we are. What's everyone's favorite DBZ movie, by the way? Let me know. Anyway, this was a smack dab the middle of the Gohan being awesome era of DBZ, and though this movie isn't canon, it's still pretty awesome for the Gohan fans. All the Z fighters were incapacitated by the alien Bojack and his minions. Even Gohan was getting his butt handed to him, but luckily his dad showed up to save him before giving him a pep talk, and a pep talk from Goku is enough to turn anyone into Superman, especially if you're a Saiyan. And Gohan powered up to Super Saiyan 2 before brushing off Bojack's minions like they were nothing. Then Bojack decided to take the youngster out by himself, but ended up getting Gohan's fist shoved right through his stomach. I loved it when Dragon Ball was brutal and just insanely violent like this. Anyway, the fight ends with Bojack powering up for one final attack and a desperate attempt to win, and he's like, got any last words? And Gohan has the best comeback ever. He's like, yeah, I have one word that comes to mind. Kamehameha! You know the drill. And he just obliterates him. It's perfect. Perfect end to that fight. Hatsumi versus Takayuki from Kengan Ashura. Takayuki seemed like he'd be a tough opponent to take out, claiming to be able to replicate any fighting style he witnesses, thus becoming known as an actor. That's why it came as quite a surprise when the seemingly lazy and laid-back Hatsumi took Takayuki out in a quick and timely fashion. At first it seemed like Chiba had the upper hand. He had Hatsumi completely on the defensive, but it wasn't long before Hatsumi turned the tables and had him on his knees before delivering 3 lightning-fast blows to his opponent's face. Chiba's nose was completely destroyed. Just brutal. I had to go back and watch it again just so my brain could actually process what actually happened. It was so quick. Hatsumi put that Bruce Lee wannabe to sleep before he even knew what hit him. He knew what hit him though. Baki versus Shunsei from Baki the Grappler. This is a fight that ended after 3 blows from Baki, but it could have ended just after the 1. I felt my brain rattling in my head just watching this fight, and I felt like my teeth were gonna fall out too. Like it just, the hits just looked so devastating. It's like Shunsei was in a car crash rather than a fight. Shunsei flew towards the young fighter, ready to deliver a punch to his face, which Baki simply sidestepped before throwing his fist right into the other fighter's jaw. If Baki just stopped there, the guy probably would have gone down, but he didn't. His next hit was an uppercut. So first Shunsei's head went down from the first punch, and it immediately got sent flying back up with the uppercut. At this point, the fight was definitely already won. Shunsei was he was just literally dropping to his knees now. And then Baki just to cinch the win even more, he delivered one last kick to the face just for good measure, right? Shunsei didn't even deliver 1 hit, and Baki didn't even break a sweat. Clear and definitive win. Thorfinn's first official duel that we see with Askeladd when he's a bit older, not when he was just a kid and could barely even lift his sword up. Pretty much every fight between these two is one-sided, but this one was early on and really showed just how long Thorfinn had to go before he could hope to stand a chance against the seasoned warrior. Askeladd really plays on Thorfinn's emotions here too and shows just how much more superior he is, not just in terms of skill, but psychologically, one-upping his opponents as well. Thorfinn had been in the Viking band for a bit now and he did some battle experience under his belt. He killed a guy for the first time, and though he seemed pretty calm and collected, fighting with intention at first, it didn't take much for Askeladd to play on the young warrior's emotions and send Thorfinn into a blind rage that made him all the more easy to subdue. Askeladd pretended to forget Thorfinn's father's name and, called him an idiot for dropping his sword in order to protect his son, who was held hostage at the time. Just really cold stuff, but not too cold for a Viking though. Levi versus the Beast Titan from Attack on Titan. From the moment Levi took to the skies on his ODM gear, it was clear that the Beast Titan was in trouble. The Beast Titan may have been larger and more intimidating, but Levi was faster, more agile, and had years of experience slaying titans under his belt. He's just a guy you never want to mess with. Size is but an imaginary concept in this soldier's mind. Levi's initial assault was so fast and brutal, the Beast Titan didn't even have time to react, as Levi sliced and diced his way through the Titan's nape, unable to defend itself against Levi's relentless barrage of attacks. Levi is like a pesky fly that just buzzes around you, and no matter how much you try and swish and swash at it, it just keeps landing on you until finally you decide to just run away, or in the Titan's case, die. Ichigo versus Aizen from Bleach. After seeing the sheer, terrifying power of Aizen, nobody thought Ichigo's final fight with the villain was going to be a walk in the park, but after Ichigo gained a significant boost in power, it pretty much was. And it was a satisfying beatdown. Ichigo reappeared from the Dangai, having now fused with Getsuga, and his power was so strong that Aizen was unable to even register it. And from this point on, Ichigo basically just knocked Aizen around. He even knocked him down a peg, literally making him regress to a previous form. And Ichigo released the final Getsuga Tensho, and even Aizen's regenerative abilities were no match for the insane unleashing of power. After that, he was sealed away and thus ended the career of one of Bleach's most infamous villains. The Darkness Devil versus everyone from Chainsaw Man. I talk about this scene from Chainsaw Man a lot, but I can't help it. First of all, I'm excited to see this character come back because we've only had a short glimpse of this devil and it made a pretty solid first impression. Like, this thing's gonna be really hard to take out. And I, of course, can't wait to see this whole sequence come to life in animated form. Manga spoilers ahead, of course. When our favorite devil hunters were sent to hell by the Hell Devil, who I already thought would be the epitome of evil, they are soon confronted by a terror even older and darker than hell itself. Darkness, the Darkness Devil. Nobody stood a chance against this devil who took out several characters without even touching them. It's a devil that seems to possess powers that are completely unexplainable, but yeah, nothing says a one-sided fight like an entity that can remove people's limbs without even having to cut through them. Just pure nightmare. And coming in at the top of the list is Luffy versus Bellamy from One Piece. One Piece has been like on every part of this list. It's just loaded with beatdowns, but anyway, this one was well deserved. I hated Bellamy and his cronies. They berated Luffy for his dreams and beliefs, saying how foolish they were and that there was no Sky Island and blah blah blah, the dreams of pirates are dead. And then they proceeded to beat the crap out of Zoro and Luffy, who made no attempts to fight back. And it was a powerful moment with the two deciding that these guys just weren't worth their time. And it was a nice callback as well to Luffy watching Shanks laughing off being attacked super early on in the series. Might have even been like the first episode, but later on, Bellamy stole Mont Blanc's gold and was bouncing around like a jerk, berating Luffy yet again. But Luffy put a stop to Bellamy's arrogant tirade with one single punch, leaving a dent in the side of his enemy's face. I love the whole theme of this arc about following your dreams despite what people think about them. Even Blackbeard gives Luffy a pep talk, and you know, we didn't really know who Blackbeard was gonna end up being yet, but it was a cool introduction to that character, I think. And this fight, if you can really even call it a fight, it was just a nice cherry on top of all that. And then the Straw Hats sailed off to Skypiea, proving everyone wrong. Just perfect.